Essentials. The definition of fasting in Islamic terms makes clear that it has two basic rukun, two basic pillars. From the definition, to abstain is to refrain, not to eat, not to drink, not to do any of the things that nullifies your fasting. This is clear. The second pillar, which is extremely important, and I began today's dars with, which is the intention. So you cannot have your fasting accepted without intention, because the Prophet said alayhi that deeds are judged by their intention. Innamal a'malu bin niyat. And when it comes to fasting, the intention of mandatory fastings must be done before the adhan of Fajr. So any time at night time, whether it's Maghrib, Isha, afterwards, you have to do what? You have to offer this at night time. Now, having said that, fasting has two types: mandatory types and voluntary types. The mandatory types, these are the ones that require having an intention before Adhan al-Fajr. The voluntary types do not require such an intention. It requires only the first pillar, which is to refrain and abstain from drinking and eating and the things that nullify your fasting. Again, fasting is divided into two types: mandatory and voluntary. The mandatory type are divided into three types, generally speaking. Fasting of Ramadan, which is a pillar, and underneath it falls making up for missed days of Ramadan, for someone who is traveling or someone who is sick. Number two, we have vows. So I make a vow, I will fast one day, vow for Allah Azza wa Jal. Boom, that's it. It is mandatory upon me to fulfill it, whether it's conditional or unconditional. Some people fall into the mistake of saying, if Allah cures my son, I'm gonna fast 5 days. This is not recommended. This is something that the Prophet ﷺ prohibited us from doing. But if you committed yourself to it, you have to fulfill it. And there are general vows, such as, I feel good, I want to fast one day for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. So fasting is divided into two types: mandatory types and voluntary types. As for the mandatory types, this is divided into three types as well. The mandatory fasting is divided into three categories. Each requires intention before the adhan of Fajr. You must have the intention at night, regardless whether you eat the pre-dawn meal known as suhoor or not. But you have to have the intention that you're fasting tomorrow. So the first category of mandatory fasting is the fasting of the month of Ramadan. And underneath it, also we can include the making up of missed days of Ramadan due to sickness or to traveling. Number two, vows. Vows are mandatory for us to fulfill, though initiating them is not something recommended, because Allah does not want you to enforce something upon yourself that Allah did not order you to do. And number three are the expiations. You take an oath by Allah's name and you were unable to fulfill it, you expiate by fasting 3 days. You make a mistake during Hajj in committing something that is prohibited, such as covering your head or wearing a shirt, you expiate by fasting 3 days, and so on. So many things. And this is not the time to go into details, but maybe, inshallah, we will come to discuss this in our chapter later on. So these are the each alternate day, fasting of the 10 days of the Hijjah, Ashura, Arafah, etc. These are all voluntary fastings. If you wake up in the morning, go to Fajr prayer, come back, and you did not eat or drink anything after the Adhan, and at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, you said, what the heck? Let me continue fasting. This is valid. This would count, and this is accepted, inshallah, Azza wa Jal.